Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see me and hear me well. Welcome to today's webinar, Power to Heat Sector Integration. We're happy to welcome you for the next 2 hours and something and a quarter, where we'll be discussing interesting aspects behind the Power to Heat Sector Integration. We'll be having very insightful, hopefully for everyone, presentations from various experts in the field. We will be inviting opinions and latest studies and results from the system perspective, so from TSOs and ENTSO-E that have been doing recent studies, and in addition, we will have also dedicated presentations from International Energy Agency, from the European Heat Pump Association, and the Euro Heat and Power Association as well. My name is Ioannis Theologidis, and I will be moderating today's workshop on behalf of ENTSO-E, but sitting together with esteemed experts that you see in front of you, steering the discussion, and of course interacting with you through the dedicated Q&A sessions. So that today's agenda practically is split in different sets. We will be having some key findings and messages from the ENTSO-E study that was published earlier this year. And then we will be moving to some results and key results that the International Energy Agency also produced on the heat pump, but not only, giving a little bit the perspective of decarbonization of the heat sector, and moving then more to the pillars of the heat pumps and also the district heating aspects. At the end, of course, in the meantime, there will be Q&A sessions through Slido. I will give more details in a bit, and we will also have a dedicated panel discussion with all the experts, where we will be taking more questions from you and trying to get some very nice results, wrapping up at the end with the help of Norela Constantinescu, the head of innovation sections at ENTSO-E. A bit of housekeeping rules, as always, before we dive into the content. So all attendees are by default muted. However, you can hopefully very easily interact with us by actually using the QR code that leads you to the Slido, or you can actually type slido.com and you can enter the code, where you can actually post your questions and participate to a couple of warm-up polls that will follow this slide. There will be no direct interaction through the GoToWebinar tool as such, so the chat is already disabled, so everything that you need, you will find it through Slido. For your information, this webinar is recorded, and the video of the recording as well as the presentation will be made available at the ENTSO-E website. That for starting, just to capture a little bit also the variety of attendees that we have today. Maybe the first Slido that we have available for you. That you can already participate, just to capture a little bit from which part of the business are you coming from? What are you representing today? Interesting. Transmission system operators, RDIs, industry representatives, DSOs, policymakers. Leaving it for a few more seconds. Very good. All in all, we have a good mixture, I think, for today's webinar. and also the nature is the system integration. So happy to see also that we have a good weight also from that part as well. So we move forward to the next one. So a bit of what your role is within those organizations: engineering, policy, project management, and so on. Very interesting. A good mixture of technical expertise, but not only project management, legal. The other may reflect policy as well. Excellent. So thank you very much. I think with knowing now who we also have connected to this webinar, maybe we can move directly to the first few slides, which will be actually our welcoming notes. We will invite I will invite Marco Forteleoni, who will actually speak today on behalf also of his function as RDIC Vice Chair. But of course, he is also Head of Innovations in the Italian transmission system operator Terna. So Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ioannis. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to be here and open this webinar. I'm also very happy to see that many participants are attending this event today. These are mainly opportunities for disseminating the main outcomes, the activities coming from the Research and the Development and Innovation Committee of ENTSO-E, and also ways for sharing the main challenges we are facing for the future energy systems. Well, I would like to give you a brief introduction of the topic that will be discussed today. Very briefly, if we move to the slide, Ioannis, I do not see maybe the slide.
Yeah, there is, I think, a small delay on changing the slide.
Okay.
Let me try to reshare maybe.
Okay, I'll see my.
Not yet.
I see my camera, yes, mirrored.
Yeah, apologies. We're trying to reshare the slides.
Okay. Now I see it. Thank you so much.
Apologies for that.
Yes. It's good to be online. Don't worry. Just a couple of numbers in this slide. Heating and cooling is the largest energy consuming sector in Europe. It accounts for approximately 50% of the final energy demand in Europe. And still of them is 80% of the energy in this sector comes from fossil sources. So for this reason, the decarbonization of the heating and the cooling sector is something of paramount importance and crucial to be addressed properly. So require many efforts for the future, in particular from electricity generation. We know that RES have already become mainstream investment if you compare with fossil, but not only in Europe, but almost worldwide, but also in terms of deep electrification, which is taken into account by many actors in several sectors. So this is the main context. So if the final consumption or something now that are becoming the big elephant to be captured, let me say. If we move to the next slide, another important point that I would like to highlight regards the synergy between the heating and cooling and the electricity sectors, also in terms of services needed by the power system, and in particular for flexibility. If we put under a future perspective of an integrated energy system, we are called systems of systems for the future. We can see a few interactions between the power and the sectors, in particular from electrification of heating system, which implies electric load increase and load profile modification, but also the opportunity in the form of flexibility provision through demand response and the exploitation of the intrinsic thermal performance of the heating and cooling systems. Also, thermal storage system in a specific application can ensure medium-long term duration flexibility at the energy system level. If we move to the next slide, we have mentioned flexibility. As you can understand, one of the key points for the future is the contribution that such services will give to the system in terms of flexibility. So in a full carbon neutral system, it will require large scale flexibility, both in terms of short and long duration flexibility. So this is another aspect that will be further highlighted in the presentation that will come ahead by the speakers. But the point of flexibility for the future is something crucial that, to be addressed. And finally, to the next slide, before concluding my opening remarks, I would point your attention to the link of this subject, specific subject, to our RDI roadmap that we have in place for 2020-2030. The roadmap identifies, 3 major clusters and addressed by 6 flagship projects, which are very important for ENTSO-E. In particular, 2 flagships are related to this specific topic that we see today. One is the flagship 1. It deals with the optimized cross-sector integration. And the other flagship 2 is related to the developer or an ecosystem for deep electrification. So these 2 flagships are mainly in charge of the working group of future of energy system in RDC, which is leading such a challenge for the future. In particular, power to heat we see today, specifically about also electric mobility, power to grid, a new stream of water energy nexus. In particular, together with power to heat, also another stream is dedicated to address the impact of smart charging, vehicle to grid, both in terms of light vehicles or EV duty. It is another brand new field, so we are working on with the separate papers, and the future discussion will follow, I hope. But anyway, these are the main points that in RDAC we are focused on with a dedicated working group, and today we will explain better the first 3. Okay, at the end, I would like to thank you, all the people with ENTSO-E contributed very actively in elaborating the study on the power in the sectors. It was published in this year, and of course, all the people involved in the preparation of this event. I do not take more time, Ioannis. I wish you all to go through this webinar very intensively and to have an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you. Thank you for this very insightful opening remarks. Apologies again for the small hiccups there, the technical ones, but we can move forward hopefully with no other surprises. And that means that I can also the screen and then move forward with the agenda where we can invite the next speaker, Antonio Liceto. Today he will speak in his capacity as a convener of the ENTSO-E's working group of future of energy systems. He was also leading the project team developing the ENTSO-E study on power to heat sector. But of course also he is part of the Terna's team, the Italian TSO, on international operations. Antonio, I will give you the floor.
Thank you for introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, but unfortunately, I think the video is not well connecting. Some last minute problem with this tool, but I will speak hoping that the audio is good enough. So the recently published was in February position paper on integration of power and heat sectors has been done for the reason that Marco has shown before, and we have addressed particularly the impact on the power grid in terms of system planning, system operation, and also how the markets and the business models can be changed. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. I understand I have to ask you. Cannot do from remote. So in particular, we have analyzed the perspective of the related technologies, which are heat pumps, cogeneration, district heating, thermal storage, which is very important, but also waste heat recovery and in general efficiency use of the best resources for the most important final users, which are the key drivers for electrification and also the flexibility potential, and also addressing some market and policy aspects. All this framed into the European fast evolving legal and regulatory framework. So the next slide, thank you. We have seen that we need the full decarbonization of the heat sector. The starting points of all the European nations are very different, as you can see from a bird's eye view from this graphic, different colored bars, which and also not only it is fragmented, but it is also characterized by building and appliance stock, which are aging and energetically some of them are inefficient. With another click, thank you, we can see that heating and cooling in average is about 50%. That was said by Marco, but in some countries is even more, especially for the heating for cold climate countries. And the only renewables today are mostly biomass and heat pumps using renewable electricity. The next slide, we can see that we have considered taxonomy of both end users on the right, on the left side of the screen, and of sources. And you can see all the blue ones on the left side can can be electrified, or in any case have an impact on the electric system. And in terms of sources, the green ones on the right side, you see that there are many possible possibility to make renewable. So with the yes, and another categorization that we have addressed is to have distributed system or centralized. The centralized can be at building level or a district level. All these have different characteristics, especially for the final user uptake, the market solution. In the next one, we can see that you will find the position paper and in some of the annexes a lot of data analytics about which final users and which sources according to the previous taxonomy. We see that the two most important ones are space heating of building and industrial processes, which have very different characteristics, so they deserve a different treatment and different processes for decarbonization. And in particular, in the residential sector, the heat respect of cooling represents the largest energy use. And we have to consider the starting point, fossil, particularly gas, in many countries, which are based heavily infrastructurally with an important gas system. So passing from gas to electricity, not only switching the final device, but is also transport, distribution, supply, all the whole supply chain has to be changed. And also in a coordinated way to avoid stranded assets and not only to reach energy efficiency, but also infrastructure efficiency. We can go to the next slide. So we see different priorities in sequential for decarbonization. First of all is efficiency. There is still much efficiency in the heat sector to be harnessed. And after this, use of thermal renewable sources. So you don't need to make energy conversion with the related losses. After that, electrification, which is mostly what we talked about today, because the other two may also not impact directly the electric system. And for what cannot be electrified, use of hydrogen and its derivatives, especially for hard-to-abate industrial processes like the one with high temperature. So focusing now on the electrification. First of all, coming from a very different starting points, there is no solution which fits all. And there are also very different scenarios. For example, just think at the price of the fossils of gas, which is going up and down, and this is mostly, and in many cases, independent from the price of electricity. Of course, the ratio between price of gas and electricity for the final user is very important to decide to shift. But the efficiency improvement has to come first. There are already many directives and many incentives also at national level, especially for thermal installation of buildings, but also on industrial processes optimization and use of waste energy, which is typically in the form of heat. So not to forget that the shift to gas as a transitional point of the trajectory for decarbonization was seen before the European war from Russian aggression was seen as a very smooth process, and now it has been accelerated. So you can see from this graph that in any scenarios, these are different scenarios taken from various European studies. The yellow part, gas, in all of them is going away, but there are different ideas, different forecasts in the total energy consumed, so how much efficiency can be gained, the total height of the bar, and which of the color, which of the other sources can become predominant. So we see, next, thank you, they coming in particular to the interaction, and we're looking for synergies in energetic interaction between power and heat sector. They follow under three categories. First is electrification of heating system, which means for us, for the grid operator, for the electricity system operator, an increase of load, very, very big increase, but also a modification of load profile. So we will need grid reinforcement, load congestion. But also on the other side, having a lot of new electric load, they can be provider of flexibility, which is very much in need. Both as the demand response, so responding to different prices of the final devices, but also as thermal storage, which is the second category. For long-term flexibility, there are no many sources. One of them is the molecules, so hydrogen, but the other one, still in the early stage, is the thermal storage. So the energy system as a whole is looking very much to this kind of long-term flexibility, in particular to thermal storage. Third point is that this, again, widening the view on the whole energy system, not only power system. We will have to combine in the most efficient way, efficient both energy term, infrastructure term, all the different possibilities that you find here, and all of them all the different technologies, let's say, but also the use cases. There are many different use cases. All of this will require a lot of digitalization. For example, first and foremost, to have visibility and control of the final devices, otherwise they cannot deploy a demand response. So to connect, we see that electrification means for us that there will be more peak. You see on the left side of the graphic, the steepness of this curve means we need more peak plants, which are costly to the system. If we can smooth this, we will save both grid and generation plants. And this means that we have to avoid oversizing the grid. And talking about congestion, in the next slide, you can see the map. It is showing one of the typical situations of exchanges. There are a lot of energy exchanges, electricity we are talking here, between all member states and also neighboring ones. And on the right, you see a result of a study that we have made, considering all the borders between countries. Where you see red or green, it means that the complete electrification of each sector would increase if it is red, or decrease if it is green, this congestion. So there is something to be looked at in more detail here. That was a first kind of analysis. So in the next slide, we can see that the flexibility has to come from win-win solutions. So the system gets flexibility, remunerate who is giving it, and this remuneration must cover all the capex and opex, and also maybe the giveaway of some freedom of use of your final device, be it smart charging of a vehicle or a heating system of a building. Of course, I repeat this because it's very important. The devices have to be visible and controllable, so at least IoT, but also sophisticated digitalization platform to allow final user and their aggregators to participate to a market, because all this flexibility shall be provided through market mechanisms. And thermal storage, not only big ones, but also locally, can provide an extra optimization of the income of the final user. And talking about thermal storage, the next, thank you. In the position paper, we have analyzed all the different technical possibilities, technologies, but also the materials, and also different application. Again, the use cases are quite different. And on the right side, you see a typical learning curve. Some of these are already in a good maturity, but many of them still are not. So a lot of R&D and innovation has to be attention has to be put there. Storage can complement direct electrification. For example, very promising is the technology of thermochemical storage, which can have a density up to 20 times greater than sensible storage. And even comparing it to electrochemical, there are some advantages in energy terms, of course, not in dynamic characteristics. We need batteries, electrochemical for fast response. We need thermochemical for longer time and larger quantities. So they are complementary. There is not a race between the two. One point among the barriers which are represented here is that this can be applied to, if we talk about buildings, to new buildings, which are very few in Europe, and instead the retrofitting of the existing built environment has a lot of practical barriers, from civil works to business case. This is for building. Instead, for industrial processes, there is more space for positive business cases, and this is a sector which has to be looked at. In the next slide, we see on one side, on the right side, we see that the amount of flexibility of storage, in particular, this is about storage, is increasing very much with the percentage of penetration of electric renewable sources. Since the target is to go to almost 100%, you can easily see from this graphic that we have, which is logarithmic in the vertical scale, that we have we must count on an exponential deployment, which places the issues of supply chain, of manufacturing, of human skills also, but also the impact of the system is not just that you plug them in. You have to change some operational philosophies as well. Just one hint on the other graphic that the main characteristic of thermal storage for the final use point of view is duration and temperature of discharge. So particularly for us, duration, but temperature of discharge is important for industrial process. And talking again about thermal storage, in the next last slide dedicated to this, we can talk in general, you can see on the right upper side, of sort of bipole or quadrupole multi-energy. Some devices which do exist, and an example is given in the other graphic, which has both as input and as output, both electricity and heat. So up to if you have also thermal storage inside and other kind of storages in the two systems before and after this quadrupole, you can reach two kind of decoupling energy input from energy output. So shifting in time, this is a sort of thermal battery, which is very much important for the load profile. So because in the future the system will have to follow the production profile from intermittent natural sources. The second decoupling is decouple electricity profile from heat profile. If you can have such a device, you can really play around with a controllable energy conversion, both in input and output, and reaching the most efficient for this. So coming to a close, some key messages. First of all, there are different phases and pathways. Everybody is in agreement, there is consensus on the need of decarbonization, but there will be different phases, different pathways. And another analysis which is in the position paper is that some countries have an electric system which could already now, with not many new reinforcement, accept a almost full electrification, while others of heat system, others will need to do large reinforcement. So there is need of coordination of the pace, the rhythm of the electrification and the upgrading of the infrastructure. We have seen that demand side flexibility is paramount, and thermal storage is very much looked at for long duration. And its potential today is for, with a built stock, built environment. There are many hundreds of millions of buildings, residential, but also service and also industrial, which need heating, not only for process. And this is a huge sector to be addressed also with incentive. And let's remind that there is a lot of waste heat recovery. For example, data centers are being built, very big one. So they have a constant heat production. Actually, the electricity production is mostly for cooling them. And having the possibility to recover this waste heat is a question mostly of location, because you cannot transport heat as easily as you transport molecules or electricity. So even enlarging the coordination of infrastructure with also industrial plants, industrial compound, but even urban and territorial development can allow this recovery. And I think this is the last about key recommendation. We have to be to look at the consumer. So business model has to be consumers focused, because in the end it would be them to decide and to pay for this big shift to decarbonize the system. And this has to be backed by markets for flexibility, for example, but not only, and a larger regulatory framework. So installing new type of heating device it's not viable in the same way according to the final use cases. So an assessment of compatibility has to be done. It depends on how your building is done, how your present heating system is done. If you have insulation enough, for example, the heat pump, and I'm really happy to hear about heat pumps more in detail in the following presentation, are very much efficient, but they have many barriers in some cases, in some circumstances. There are barriers and the initial cost to be bought. So the business cases, some cases are easy, are positive, some they are not. So there will be need of innovation, but also need of incentive. From our grid operator point of view, we think that incentive should be there in particular for kind of devices, in particular heat pumps, which are ready for being visible and controllable. So we could call them smart grid ready. In the position paper, there are also an appendix with examples. For example, one is in UK is heat as a service. Another interesting one was in Sweden, where a district heating was not only giving heat but also receiving heat, so creating at least locally sort of market. And I think I will stop here. Sorry for not sharing my video.
Thank you, Antonio, and no problem about the technical issues. Thank you very much for the detailed presentation of the ENTSO-E study. We invite all participants as well to continue using the slide and sharing any comments or questions. We also display here the QR code and the details for connecting. We can proceed to the following presentation, but before that, maybe one quick question and a comment that we received as well, Antonio. So, you know that there has been also like a movement also from the European Commission with regard to investigations on heat pumps as well. There was a public consultation as well. So from your perspective, and trying to reflect a bit the perspective also of the system and the TSOs, what are one or two items and focus areas, at least from the TSOs, that we could further investigate or have research on? What would be the interesting areas there to explore?
Well, as in other cases of sector coupling, what has not been addressed so much, but it is our task of the operators, is to analyze quantitatively the impact on the grid. Because this phenomena will happen differently in different countries and with different time horizons, but they will come very heavily. Look what is happening with electric vehicles. In some countries, they are already mainstream, and eventually they will be the only one. So we have to know how these devices, in particular heat pumps, how many there will be, which characteristics, which ones we have to expect to be deployed before than others. And this depends very much on the positive business cases. So in order to be ready for grid reinforcement, together with all the other trends which are changing completely the electric system. So I think coordinated planning is very relevant, and also together with to be able to be providing flexibility. Otherwise, it would be not a win-win solution. It would be just a rush for grid operators to follow up the possibility to connect many of them, and they will be only a burden. Instead, they can be both a burden, but also a source of flexibility to solve this burden. And this requires a lot of coordination with also non-energy actors, like, for example, in the building sector, the structuring of new building, the land use authorities, and industrial compounds, for example.
Thank you, Antonio. And we'll touch upon also the coordination in the following slides and also in the panel discussion. There has been, now that there are more questions coming, but I will keep some also for the panel discussion later on, so as to move forward with the agenda. Just to mention one comment that was first received during your presentation, that when it comes to electric storage water heaters, actually one could argue that those are easy to retrofit, basically. So that's more as a comment than actually a question. And with that, yes.
If we talk about resistive heating, is not what we are thinking at. Resistive heating has always been there. Is efficient energetically, 100%, because it makes electricity into heat convert. But if you consider the total use case, you don't get the efficiency gain from the copper, typical of a heat pump, and it can give flexibility only with on and off. Instead of being always on, you can make it on and off. Instead, what we are thinking with heat pumps is to have much more sophisticated behavior to help to support the system, and be being paid for them. With the on and off, you can only follow the price. This is a sort of intrinsic demand response, but there is more that you can capture.
Yeah, but more you would recommend like more of a droop function, for instance. Thank you, Antonio. With that, we can move forward to the next presentation from Rafael Martinez Gordon. He's representing the International Energy Agency, providing some perspectives on decarbonization of heat sector. So, Rafael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yanis. I hope the audio video is okay. If not, just please let me know. And yes, my name is Rafael Martinez. I work at the IEA in the built environment team. And yeah, as Yanis mentioned, I will present today some overview on perspectives on heat decarbonization, more on a global perspective. But first, let me introduce you to our net zero scenario, which maybe some of you already know. It's a scenario that we first released a couple of years ago in 2021. But last month, we released an updated version, seeing where we stand after 2 years. And the main message of this updated roadmap is that we are net zero by 2050 is still possible, but the pathway is narrower now. And just showing here some of the intermediate milestones and areas that we need to touch to make this happen. The first one, of course, is to avoid new long lead time upstream projects that could lock in emissions in the very long term. So basically, from today in this scenario, we don't see any new unabated coal power or no need for new oil and gas fields. 2030 is a very important milestone year in this scenario, because what we showed is that not meeting the targets by 2030 would mean relying too much in the last years of the pathway in carbon dioxide removals, which, as you know, they are still not ready. There's lots of uncertainties, so this could compromise this pathway. And as some intermediate milestones, you can see triple renewable capacity, mainly wind and solar PV, doubling energy intensity improvements from 2% to 4% per year, cut methane from fossil fuels by 75%, and all new heavy industries beyond 2030 to be near zero emission capable. By 2035, the target implies advanced economies decline 80% emissions, while emerging and developing economies 60%. And as a consequence, by 2050, we foresee in this scenario a completely transformed energy system with power generation 90% renewable, with over 70% of wind and solar, nuclear capacity to be doubled, and a large amount of electrification with 50% of final consumption electrified, and some carbon dioxide removals with 1.7 gigatons of CO2 per year. So if we can pass to the next slide, we can jump into the space and water heating analysis in this net zero scenario as well. And what we can see is that in the last decade, at global scale, emissions related to space and water heating have been quite flat, around 4 gigatons of CO2 per year. A bit less than half of them indirect emissions coming from power and district heating grids, but a large amount direct emissions coming from combustion in buildings, with natural gas being a big part of it. And the big challenge is that in this scenario, in the coming 7 years, by 2030, emissions would need to be almost half indirect emissions and half direct emissions. Direct emissions being around 1.2 gigatons of CO2 at 2030, primarily via switching from natural gas, oil, and fossil fuels to electricity and clean district heat. So it's a big change in front of us. And if we check what happens with the fuel mix, if we can move to the next slide, and zooming into space heating, we can also say that the challenge in front of us it's big. In our scenario, by 2030, we would see a 30% reduction in terms of total final consumption for space heating, and by 2050 this will be a 70% reduction. All that considering that at the same time, heated floor area is expected to grow by 30%. So this is a consequence of, or this happens while phasing out fossil fuels. By 2050, we see that almost more than half of the final consumption comes from electricity, including heat pumps, plus district heat. And yeah, I think yeah, if we can go, sorry, before to the previous year, because just to show that if no actions were taken, final consumption could be around 50 exajoules by 2050, but most of the reductions come at a small part from behavioral changes, like different set points and reduction of different consumptions in the space heating sector, but most of the reductions come from avoided demand via efficiency. That means more efficient equipment and more efficient envelopes, so retrofits and zero carbon ready buildings, plus of course electrification and fuel switch from natural gas and oil to well, efficient electric equipment and heat pumps. And now if we move to the next slide, we can see a bit more in detail these two levers that I mentioned. On the one hand, first, the evolution of the envelope type, as mentioned, floor area is expected to grow in our scenario, primarily in emerging and developing economies. As of today, we estimate that 70% of the floor space worldwide is non-compliant to building codes. This, in this scenario, changes very quickly towards 2030, where we see that 15% of the floor space is zero carbon ready, and 30% is compliant to building codes. And this aligns with a couple of milestones that we have in this scenario. That is that beyond 2030, all new buildings are zero carbon ready buildings. And in advanced economies, every year 2.5% of the floor space is retrofitted to this zero carbon ready level. And this enables the reduction of space heating intensity to almost half of the value in 2010. And on the heat pump side, which is one of the key technologies enabling this change as well, what we see in this scenario is that, again, during this decade, heat pump deployment is, well, we see that it has to triple, reaching 3,000 gigawatts by 2030, starting from around 1,000 gigawatts in 2023. So it's a quite big increase happening mostly in advanced economies, but where emerging and developing economies, also mainly driven in China, will contribute also to this increase. We've seen the emissions, energy, and the scale up that we need on heat pumps in particular. So just putting some more attention on how heat pump markets are evolving and if they are on track with this increase that we see that needs to happen. We did last year a market analysis to understand how markets are evolving worldwide. And what we see is that global heat pumps are growing for the last 2 years that we tracked with double digits, 13 and 11% respectively. But still, this is not enough. In our net zero projections, what we see is that the heat pump markets will grow close to 20%. So even though the market signals are very positive, there's still more efforts to put there. And if we explore segment by segment in the air to water, we see that numbers are positive and beyond what we needed in the net zero scenario, particularly driven by Europe, which last couple of years very much sorry, can we go previous slide? I see now the trade one. If we could come back to the market one. This is the one right after. So basically, just to wrap up on the on the air to air, where the growth is slowing down in the last year, and there are maybe more attention should be put there. In the US, signs of market trend is positive, while mostly all heat pumps installed in the US are air to air, and in Europe as well. But in China, we saw this slowdown in sales the last couple of years. That is something that we maybe to check with attention. So air to air segment is growing slower than what we will need to see in the net zero scenario. And now, if we can move to the next slide, just very quickly to mention on trade. So that's something we also monitor within the IEA to see how trade can affect the clean technology supply chains. And for heat pump, the conclusion is that even though, of course, it can be a beneficial tool, we see that the role in compared to domestic deployment is not huge, around 10% in terms of share of global deployment. But in Europe, we see that the share of import is slightly higher than in other regions with around 25% of units installed in 2021 being imported, and most of them coming from China. So there's probably the biggest trade connection. It's the one that we identified there. And just to close this part on the building side, if we go to the next slide, we have some numbers on manufacturing. Just to put some numbers, in 2021, when we first did this analysis, manufacturing capacity worldwide was around 100 gigawatts. Last year, 2022, this was 120, so there was an increase there. If we take announcement and expansion plans from manufacturers, we see that there's around 50 gigawatts of capacity that is in the pipeline, mostly coming from Europe. Actually, I think over 90% of this pipeline is from Europe, from around 4 billion euros that are already well announced by different manufacturers. But still, this is far away from what we would need in this net zero scenario that we are discussing, because in that case, manufacturing capacity will need to be around 400 gigawatts. But just some caveat here is that first, lead times for putting these lines online to bring this capacity online is typically short, a couple of years maybe. So if there's a ramp up in demand, the supply could in theory follow quite quickly. And second is that these announcements are typically in Europe. We saw last year there were quite some, but in other regions like in the US and China, we see that manufacturers typically don't share publicly these announcements. So this doesn't mean that there's no project pipeline in other regions, but more than maybe the communication is not that clear. But in any case, this is the official pipeline, which is still far away from what's needed in our scenario. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just a few slides to conclude on industry and the role that heat pumps in particular could play in industry. And just first to mention that, well, as most of you know, temperatures above 200 degrees or heat pumps are tricky to implement. Direct electrification, as of today, is generally preferable. There are some technologies that are already being used or developed. And of course, innovation could bring heat pumps to these levels, and that's why R&D and innovation is definitely needed. But in low temperatures, heat pumps definitely have a big role to play to displace fossil fuels. And what you can see here is in one of our scenarios in the announced pledges, which is a scenario where all national targets and pledges are met in time, on time and in full. The share of the global industrial process heat demand is set to increase, and 40% of this is expected to remain below 200 degrees, so in an area which is in principle suitable for heat pumps. And in the next slide, just a short example that we also published a couple of years ago, just to zoom in Europe, is of course the fact that there's process heat at these temperatures doesn't mean that it could be heat pumps could be used directly. Of course, there are some caveats there. In the paper industry, our analysis showed that around 65% of process heat could in principle be met by heat pumps. Of course, with the substantial changes in the systems. In the food industry, around 40%, mainly in temperatures below 150 degrees, because there's a low availability of waste heat. And in the chemical industry, so it's more tricky because typically temperatures are very high, but still heat pumps could reach around 1/4 of the potential, and waste heat availability is higher here. So in theory, there's also a good match. So just in this quick example, you can see here in Europe, in these three industries, around 30% could be met by heat pumps available today. This would mean a combined capacity of 15 gigawatts and around 3,000 industrial heat pumps only in these few sectors, just to put these numbers in context. And just to conclude, a couple of slides on cost, because of course, when we talk about heat pumps in industry, there's the cost component is also one of the issues as in the building sector. But in the case of industry, operation costs are typically more relevant. As you can see in the figure, the capital expenditures are in gas boilers versus heat pumps is not a big part of it. But current market designs typically may complicate the penetration of heat pumps. Finland, which you can see below, is kind of an exception with well, an energy cost environment which is positive with low taxes for electricity, and which made the heat pump penetration more favorable. And we saw there that even in the last few years, heat pumps were cost competitive compared to gas boilers, but in Germany, this was not the case. Also partly because of these higher taxes and levies on electricity to use in industry compared to gas boilers. But if you could click one time, we could see the evolution of this comparison in 2021 after the price shocks, or even in Germany, and even with this larger proportion of tax and levies, heat pumps during this period were the life cycle competitive in this analysis. And just before closing, if we can close quickly with the next slide, just very quickly to mention that these local specificities have a very deep impact. Just to see that this is a projection in our announced pledges scenario by 2030, with higher penetration of renewables in the grid and lower electricity costs. Just to show that projections are in few years, if these targets and ambitions are met, heat pumps and other low carbon heat sources like solar, thermal, or bioenergy could be cost competitive in a wide range of countries versus coal and natural gas, which today is not the case in many areas. And with this, because I think I'm over time, I close maybe in the next slide, which I guess people can check offline, but just a couple of some publications that we published in the last couple of years, which are kind of related to electrification, heat pumps, our net zero roadmap, and yeah, just to mention, yesterday we also published some special report on grids, which can be also really interesting for the topic. And then 1 week, the World Energy Outlook will be launched. That for sure will have also some insights. So that was all I have in the slides. So thank you very much for the attention, for the time. Any question, happy to answer, either here or by mail or LinkedIn or by any means. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you very much. I think it was a very good presentation with a lot of interesting numbers from industry, market, scenarios. So I think you capture different aspects there. That's why we have also some interesting questions coming in, so we can take maybe a couple of them, more focusing on the challenges part. So one, for instance, is that most of those heat pumps practically will be connected or are connected to the low voltage network, which in cases it's not adequate actually to absorb this penetration. So when it comes, for instance, to replacing cables in an efficient way or in a timely fashion, are there any suggestions, for instance, to overcome such challenges?
This is something I think we haven't. Yesterday actually we released this report on grids, and I think there was a specific analysis trying to understand how investments in different decentralized technologies and investments in grids are not aligned, let's say. So let's say the equipment part is going way faster than the distribution grids and connectivity. So I think we have this type of analysis, but I don't think we have gone that in detail to, let's say, the household level to understand how different types of interconnectors there could affect. But definitely this challenge, we have quantified it, how there's a big mismatch between the investments on the, let's say, distribution side and the investments on the equipment side. And this is not only for heat pumps, but for electric vehicles and for a type of end users. So, yeah, but on the specific household level, that nothing comes off the top of my head in terms of analysis.
Okay. Thank you, Rafael. But maybe if I can maybe switch somehow the challenge from the side of the industry and the market. So, in order to meet those scenarios or the expected scenarios, are there any recommendations that IEA is doing, for instance, to different industries or governments for speeding up, for instance, because we are talking about also upgrading and upscaling capacities there. Manufacturing capacity. So
yeah, for the heat pump side in particular, what we saw is that in most markets the supply is or has shown that it's able to catch up with demand, and Europe is a very good example. With after COVID, the pandemic, with very disrupted supply chains, there was two consecutive years with growth rates over 30%, 35%. So supply was able to control this. So I think the challenge would be to, from the policy level, to stimulate the demand so that there's an organic growth. We don't have, like, let's say, an artificial demand that then goes up, down. And I think one good suggestion for that would be to have first a clear policy framework so that manufacturers can invest in manufacturing lines, knowing that the conditions will be stable and positive in the coming years, and there's no expected big changes in regulation, let's say, in the coming 2-3 years, because these investments need to be recovered, let's say, more in the medium long term. And then to stimulate demand, we have also in Europe very good examples, like in Scandinavia, where carbon taxes and having a ratio, and I'm sure Josephine later will talk about this, but these ratios, electricity and gas, and creating this kind of level field where electricity is not taxed more, or gas boilers have, let's say, this tax advantage. I think this is the best market signal we can send to manufacturers to make, to let the heat pump market grow in a, let's say, organic way. And of course, there are many other recommendations that doesn't.
Of course,
we can discuss later in the panel as well.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. Thank you very much. We'll keep a few more questions here for the panel discussion, just to bridging a little bit the gap here from the initial inconveniences, technical ones, and then we can move forward actually to the following presentations. Then we will have 2 presentations together without the Q&A session in between, coming from the European Heat Pump Association and then the Euro Heat and Power, starting first with Josephine van Besselere, who is the head of EU affairs of the EHPA. And then we will continue with Pauline Lucas, Policy Director from Euro Heat and Power. So first, Josephine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. And also thank you to the previous speakers. I think it really flows very well now. It's also my presentation, especially the different points that were already highlighted by Rafael. I think, yeah, it's quite complementary with what I will say. So on the first slide, I put, yeah, so this is a first slide on really the maturity of the technology, and on this one I can be very short. Heat pumps are a mature technology today and they are used everywhere. You all have a heat pump in your house because your fridge is actually a heat pump, and then also in commercial, residential and industrial applications they are used more and more, and in big buildings as well. On the next slide, you can see the market growth. This has also already been pointed out by Rafael. So you see indeed for the past 10 years, our sector has only been growing, and especially in 2022, we have seen really an exceptional growth of an additional 39%. So now we are at around 20 million installed heat pumps, and last year with this 39% increase, this was 3 million sales that this represents. So it's really a very steep growth, but I have to counter a bit what Rafael already pointed out, is that now we have actually heard from our members, many of them are of course heat pump manufacturers, that they say this year this growth has been, they have seen really a slowdown or a bit of a dip in the growth. Many of them have invested a lot in additional factories and additional production lines for heat pumps, especially because there was this high growth. There was 5 billion of investments announced from different manufacturers. But this year, because of the inflation and also because of the political backlash, for example, in Germany, we have seen a very heated debate around heating and heat pumps. This has caused quite some doubts, and the demand has slowed down a bit. So we expect that the increase this year will not be as high as the last years. On the next slide, so if we go back a bit in time and we also consider the topic of today, so the energy system integration and the importance of heat pumps in that regard. A very important publication was the Energy System Integration Strategy of the EU in 2020, and it looked at 4 points, or it wanted to focus on 4 points, and in 3 of them heat pumps play a very important role. So the energy system integration strategy aimed at creating a more circular energy system, and of course heat pumps are very important for that. It was already highlighted the fact that they can really use this waste or excess heat as a source again to heat other processes and buildings. Secondly, the use of electricity from renewables should be accelerated, and also for that heat pumps are the perfect way to do that, to replace gas or fossil fuels by electricity from renewables. And then thirdly, the aim was to adapt energy markets and infrastructure to a more complex and more integrated energy system. And also this aspect, for that, heat pumps are quite important because they can offer this demand response, this flexibility to the system. If we then go to the next slide, you can see that in 2022, we had the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and we had a very steep heat pump demand. And this was also because of the EU's reaction to this invasion. And suddenly heat pumps were put really on the forefront, also literally, of this document, because suddenly they were very important as well for energy security. As the IEA says today, heating buildings represents 1/3 of the EU's gas demand, and in 2025, with heat pumps, gas demand could be reduced by 7 billion cubic meters. So heat pumps play a very important role for this energy security. In this Repower EU document, there were very ambitious targets. So they put targets for hydronic heat pumps only initially. So 10 million additional by 2027 and 30 million by 2030. But that's not the whole heat pump market. There's more than hydronic heat pumps alone. So if you extrapolate to the whole market, this would lead to 60 million heat pumps by 2030. On the next slide, you can see that after this publication of the Repower EU targets, we as a sector said, okay, this is ambitious, we want to do it, we go for it, but where is the strategy? Where is the plan? What are the actions? What should we do, or what should be done to reach this? And then we came together with more than 20 organizations, and we developed a heat pump accelerator. So it's a document where we listed the main barriers for heat pump deployment and the key actions to overcome them. You can see them on the slide, and we handed this over also to Commissioner Kadri Simpson. This was quite successful because on the next slide you can see that this has been endorsed by the European Commission, and they decided to come up with their own heat pump action plan. So they are now working on it, and they will publish it by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And it will consist of 4 pillars or 4 parts. The first one will be a platform accelerator partnership, so they don't have the exact name yet, where they will follow the operational implementation of the heat pump action plan, and it will gather the Commission, member states, and the sector at large. So all stakeholders involved to really look at the actual implementation of the different measures, and also how the targets are being reached at national levels as well. Then it will also include communication campaigns and a dedicated heat pump skills partnership. It will also list and link the ongoing legislative work, and it will also look into financing. If you then go to the next slide, I want to shift a bit more to the topic of today, how important heat pumps are to integrate the energy system, and I want to focus on 4 aspects, which have also already been highlighted in the different presentations before. The first one is indeed to make heat pumps faster rolled out. We have to adapt this electricity to gas price ratio. So this you can see on the next slide. So here, it was mentioned by Rafael. So you have, of course, a heat pump, there's a higher capex, so a higher investment cost at the start, but because they are so much more efficient than a fossil fuel boiler, so 3 to 5 times more efficient, normally they should become profitable very soon because you pay a much lower OPEX. But we see that in many countries, the electricity to gas price ratio is very high. So electricity prices are in some countries more than 3.5 times the gas price. So then, yeah, this business case doesn't add up anymore. So what we recommend as EHPA to have is to have an electricity to gas price ratio of around 2, which means that your electricity price cannot be more than double the gas price, and that should be enough to for end consumers to see quickly enough a result on their energy bills of the heat pump. If you then go to the next slide, another very important aspect for heat pumps to really integrate the energy system is, of course, to unlock the flexibility potential that they can offer. And for that, one of the things that was mentioned by Antonio is the fact that they should be smart grid ready. But that's actually, for us, not really the issue, because most of the heat pumps are smart grid ready. The technology is there. The devices themselves, they are smart grid ready, but it's more the regulation and the legislation. In many countries, it's not possible yet to have flexible contracts. For example, for myself, my own heat pump here in Brussels, I do not have the option to use it in a flexible way and to get also a reward for this flexibility. So on this map, you see in which countries the electricity market design was implemented in 2022, and you see that this is not yet the case in all member states. So there really should be price signals for end users to really unlock this flexibility. If you then go to the next slide, you see if we have a lower if we have this value to flexibility, this will also lead to more different types of business models that also require this flexibility or make use of it. So you have now different types available. I will not go through the details of these business models, but what we of course hope or expect is that if the OPEX goes down, that more and more of these business models will occur, and this will also lead to a lower capex and to a higher uptake of heat pumps. If you then move to the next slide, this is another aspect which has already been mentioned. Heat pumps are of course crucial to close the energy cycles. What does that mean? Well, wherever you have cooling, you have waste heat or excess heat, and heat pumps are ideal to use that again as a source in another part of, for example, an industrial heat pump, an industrial process, but it can also be done, for example, in a city where you have a lot of cooling in a supermarket and you have excess heat from the chillers on the roof, for example. This heat can be used to heat the apartments around the supermarket, for example. So this can also be done in cities, and not only in industrial processes. If you can switch to the next slide. So it was already mentioned by Rafael, there's a very, very high potential for using heat pumps in industrial processes. So what we say is that industrial heat demand up to 200 degrees, it's heat pumpable, as we say, and that's now 37%. So 37% of the industrial heat demand is below 200 degrees. And if we would put for all of those, for all that potential industrial heat pumps, then we would have to install 300 megawatts per month until 2050 to arrive at 105 gigawatts. So it's really, the potential is really big, but there's often still a lack of knowledge. Often the people in the factories, for example, are not yet aware enough of the potential of industrial heat pumps. Often, you still have this the cheaper fossil installations that are used. Also, many technicians are wondering, do we need to make a lot of changes in the industrial process or not to implement this, and so on. So there's still a need for a lot of additional information, and then also, of course, the grid connections for these industrial heat pumps. So that should be ensured as well. And then a last slide, something that we hear a lot is, of course, the grids will not cope with all these additional heat pumps, the lights will go out. But we actually see quite a lot of analysis that say that more heat pumps means actually more stable demand, because they offer this demand side flexibility. And this leads to new business models. And this means also, again, new players in the market and more heat pumps. So a few years ago, we launched this letter with a large group of utilities and DSOs that actually confirmed that heat pumps are not a threat to the grid, but actually a support to the grid, and they can offer this flexibility. But for that to happen, indeed, you need to unlock it with giving it a value. And then very important, I think, also in this regard and in this setup of speakers and ENTSO-E and so on, it's very important that the grid planning process really recognizes the impact of electrification and really looks at the potential of all of these heat pumps, not only as how will it impact the grid, what could it impact the grid in a negative way, but no, how will it support the grid. So we had our forum a few weeks ago, and one of the speakers said, well, the question is not, will the lights stay on with so many more million heat pumps? No, the question is rather, will the lights stay on without all these heat pumps? Because actually the flexibility that they can offer. So I think that's a good way to end and to keep in mind as well for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine, and thank you because actually, in fact, your presentation answered a few questions that we have been receiving so far. So thank you very much. I said no Q&As indeed, but I will only take one small because it has to do with clarification. In the market growth slide that you saw, it's the aggregation of all industries, the number there.
That's a good point. I actually wanted to mention, but I forgot. It's actually mainly residential heat pumps and also a big share of the commercial ones. But what we are working on at the moment is also really to include numbers on industrial heat pumps. But it's a bit more tricky because for residential heat pumps, we have our national associations that gather these data and we assemble them. But for industrial heat pumps, we need to go via the manufacturers themselves. Yeah, we are in the process because it's super important to have those data as well. So yeah, there we don't have it.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. And without any further delay, we can move forward with Pauline Lucas, Policy Director from Euroheat and Power, continuing the nice set of presentations. Pauline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yanis. Very happy to be here today for this important conversation. We can already go to the next. Thank you. So the great strength of district heating is we are an infrastructure as we schematize here, and we can combine and optimize resources depending on what is locally available. So currently we serve 67 million EU consumers, so we are indeed a mature technology and actually quite ancient in terms of technology. And we have above 17,000 networks that represent 12% of the EU heat market. And we are going to release next month a new study that is actually earmarking 20% of the heat market for district heating in 2030. So stay tuned for that next month. So basically, thank you. We have several possibilities in terms of sources. So thermal, renewable heat sources, geothermal, solar thermal, bioenergy, but also, of course, as we are busy discussing today, renewable electricity that is used in power to heat applications, so large-scale heat pumps or e-boilers. We are also harnessing locally available waste heat, so from tertiary buildings, so all the cooling of these buildings, hospitals, data centers, for instance, and of course waste heat from industrial activities, so many of them metal processes, etc. And of course, in terms of cooling, we can also rely on available sources, so free cooling from rivers, sea, lakes, etc. Can go to the next. There's a slight delay. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we currently have already 40% renewable and waste heat in our mix. But of course, the big challenge in the coming years is to decarbonize. And for this, now we have a good basis. with the Fit for 55, we had a revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive and a new definition of efficient DHC network. You can see a scheme below that is representing this new milestone that the sector will have to achieve to go basically net zero by 2050. Also note an important aspect of this definition is also that we will have no new fossil fuel capacity from 2030 onwards, so that is valid for new networks and also when you refurbish existing ones. So next, please. So today we're talking about flexibility and integration, and I will a bit enter in more details of what it represents and what the DHC sector has to bring into this equation. But it's true, and as it was already demonstrated by all the speakers, that our energy system is undergoing significant transformation. So no need to recall that we are undergoing a dual crisis, both climate and geopolitical crisis, that has triggered a lot of changes and towards a growing share of renewables in general, but obviously the variable renewables represented by solar and wind. So on the other side, we also have a growing demand for electricity, and this is putting pressure on the grid. If you zoom in the next slide, please. Here, it's just a different way of representing this new outlook for the electricity market and the new supply, as well as the demand on the right side. But it's just to tell you that sometimes we oppose heat and electricity. There is no need for that. The DHC sector is also electrifying. For the time being, heat pumps and e-boilers are representing only 1.5% of the mix, but this will grow in the coming years. We have already very conservative estimate that we will have an 80% increase in 2030, but this is only based on investment plans from large DHC networks, so this will be a lot more. And why it is important, it's because DHC network will have a dual role. So on the one hand, it will absorb this this excess renewable electricity that cannot be consumed by a sector because there is no demand at the time when it's produced. And it will also be able to either consume this electricity or store it. We have already extensively discussed the thermal storage and the importance of this technology, but it will also help free up this renewable electricity, as not all the mix of the district heating networks will be electrified. We will still, as Antonio showed, rely largely on thermal heat sources. So if we go to the next slide, we will see the importance of diversification so that we don't rely on electricity only. Let's not put all our eggs in one basket, but let's diversify. And here I brought you the example of Norway, where basically there is a very, very strong electrification trend, and where from a net exporter of electricity, they will, in the short term, run into issues and have to import electricity. So it is paramount to really diversify and also keep relying on the heating sector. So if we go to the next slide. So how can we help to diversify? So we have what we call a solution toolbox. That is composed of several technologies and solutions that enables to provide this flexibility to the energy system. So first, obviously, we already largely covered that, but the heat pumps and e-boilers that can use the excess electricity in the system, complemented by thermal storage, so be it on a seasonal perspective. So when you have generation in the summer, for example, with lots of solar PV, you can store it and use it as heat for the next winter, or you can also use buffer tanks that provide some flexibility over one day or over a couple of days. As we know, the district heating and cooling sector relies heavily on cogeneration, so combined heat and power plants. This will slightly change in the future perspective, where highly efficient cogeneration will have more of a backup and peak load role, but still very important to enable to have this extra heating when it's needed, for instance, in the winter. Another aspect that is always a little bit overlooked is low temperature district heating network. So it's another facet of flexibility, which is to lower the temperature in our district heating network in order to integrate more low-grade heat sources, for instance, waste heat from data centers. So we don't need necessarily to upgrade this heat a lot. If the temperature of the network is lowered from, for instance, 90 degrees to 40 degrees, or to include, for instance, shallow geothermal energy that is at a bit lower temperature. And last but not least, well, we have district cooling, so that's we know that the cooling demand is going to increase tremendously in the coming years, and a lot of this supply is from individual cooling or air conditioning units that need a lot of electricity. So if we also switch to district cooling, this enables to shift a little bit of its load, as district cooling can be based, for instance, on thermal energy from a lake. This is done in Geneva, namely, so this is also an interesting perspective. And overall, of course, as other speakers mentioned, we will rely on digitalization and digital solution to enable all of this flexibility. So with AI and sensors that will be and that are already integrated in our system. So all of this to deliver decarbonization and more resilient systems. If we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to bring you a little bit of a concrete example. This is Hamburg. So Hamburg utility has a target to phase out coal by 2030 and to be climate neutral district heating by 2045. So they have a sort of a three-pillar approach based on system integration. So they will leave no waste heat untapped, meaning that they already have 3 industrial excess heat recovery sites, including one from a copper manufacturing plant. And now they're also investing in recovering heat from wastewater treatment plants. So as I explained, low-grade temperature, but also very available in all cities, basically where you need to treat your water. They also have this integration approach. We have invested in an e-boiler to harness excess wind power and complemented by a thermal storage. And the last point, more innovative, they will convert a coal-fired plant into an electrolysis plant for the production of green hydrogen. So that's also interesting because you know that Germany is considering hydrogen in its mix, and you can also, from electrolysis, recover the waste heat. So it's fully circular. If we go to the next slide. After going into one concrete example, I wanted to just give an overview, very brief overview over the interesting steps towards system integration brought by the Fit for 55 package. So, for instance, we will have renewable electricity that can be accounted towards renewable targets in heating and cooling and district heating. We also have a little bit of a timid, but already there encouragement for member states to put in place frameworks for storage, including thermal storage, but we think that this could be further developed. And also an interesting, it's not really new, but it has been a bit muscled up, a systematic assessment of the potential of district heating to provide balancing services to the electricity grid. So that's located in the Renewable Energy Directive, and that's also a very good provision. In terms of recovering waste heat, we will have a coordination framework that member states can put in place to basically facilitate coordination between waste heat actors. Waste heat can also be accounted towards the sectoral targets, so industry, buildings, heating and cooling, district heating. There's also an interesting development with regard to mandatory waste heat recovery from data center above 1 megawatt. And last but not least, member states can also develop risk mitigation framework for renewable and waste heat. We know that there are certain risks attached to this business model, so this could definitely help more project uptake. Going to the next slide. We will have obviously to overcome some barrier to facilitate further system integration. So here I've listed only some of them. So inadequate EU modeling tool, we know how important these primes or METIS models are for instance, the upcoming 2040 targets. The EU Commission is relying on those models, and they are for now still a little bit imperfect in terms of their consideration for heat, flexibility, and system integration. There are already tenders in place to actually revise the METIS model to better integrate this aspect. So this is a very good sign. We also hear from our operators when they have heat pumps, they are confronted with not always optimal market setup. So with high network tariff or high taxes on electricity that are not adapted to flexible system. There is also not yet, I think it was also outlined, reward on flexibility. So this is something also to consider. And last but not least, we know that we have several grids, so the electricity and the heat grid namely, and there's a need for better planning of these grids. If we go to the last slide. So what more can we do? There are indeed opportunities for better system integration. They are actually not very far away, at least they are short-term ones. So the Commission is planning a communication on an action plan to facilitate grid rollout. Of course, this is mostly to address the power grids, but we would love to see some elements to promote sector integration. So this is coming according to the latest information next month. And we also, of course, as Josephine mentioned, we have a heat pump action plan that is also coming normally towards the end of this year. And of course, there will be further opportunities to promote system integration. We know, and we repeat it, despite the Fit for 55, we still need to focus more on heat. Unfortunately, with the conflict that arise, we started to talk more about heat, but we need a bit of a more comprehensive approach to tackle heat decarbonization. And we think that it would be a good idea to review the heating and cooling strategy that was published already in 2016. And for sure, the next EU policy mandate will be a good opportunity for that and bring a new momentum to talk about heat. But we're really happy already that ENTSO-E is interesting to open this discussion. And yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussion.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you very much to you and Josephine for the very nice presentations and also for keeping it on time, which allows us to take a couple of questions as well before we open up actually for the panel discussion. One that comes along is with regard to the data centers and the recovery of the heat. So the experience shows that some of those data centers actually they are built far from the heat loads. So what challenges actually that may bring? There are examples also quoted in the point, like in Ireland. So with regards to capturing this, and if I may couple maybe as a second bullet to this question, to what extent this heat recovery will be mandated? I mean, what would be possibly any challenges behind such kind of requirement?
Okay, Maybe I address the question a little bit reverse. So in terms of how mandated or how compulsory it is, I think in the text it's clearly mentioned that it needs to be technically and economically feasible. So already there are some safeguards. And if I go from there, I think there are some important points around this waste heat recovery. So the first prerequisite is you need an infrastructure. You need a heating grid. If you don't have it, this is yeah, not possible. So connected to that and what you mentioned, it's true that sometimes the infrastructure is a little bit further away from the possible waste heat source. So I think there is like a greater job to do on planning. And fortunately, actually, the Fit for 55 is already bringing some good news on this front. Meaning that energy and heat planning will be compulsory for larger municipalities above 45,000 inhabitants. So already there will be a little bit more of a coordinated approach to look into where to build these new networks to be able to harness this waste heat, for instance. Two other important aspects when we are discussing waste heat is the data. So we need, and I think it's only valid not for waste heat, but for all renewable waste heat sources. We had this discussion also with the renewable guys in the geothermal sector. So yeah, we need data, we need registries where basically we can match the supply and the demand. And it needs to be digital, and yeah, so we need to also make an effort. We heard this from Dublin, for instance, that they would be keen on having this municipal registries that are listing all kind of renewable and low carbon heat sources. And last but not least, yeah, economically feasible means we need a business model. So for each project, you have a little bit of an ad hoc relationship that develops between the people that have the waste heat and the district heating operator. And there it's crucial. It's always a little bit ad hoc and negotiated, but it's really crucial to pull together all these best practices and what kind of model you can have in terms of who needs to pay for what. For instance, who pays for the heat pump, where it will be located. So there are plenty of agreements and contractual aspects that are at play. So we are, for instance, as an industry, working on different checklists and contract templates to support this kind of business deals.
Thank you, Pauline. Very thorough. Thank you very much. If I may invite Josephine to join us, because the next question actually is for you. It was we had some questions coming in again with regard to the amount of heat pumps, of course, connected, and that the stress that this can bring actually to the grid. We also had like points of how if the heat pumps are fully flexible in terms of modulation, minimum downtimes and uptimes. I think this is also relation with how smart they can behave also with regard to integration and supporting the system. I mean, you already, correct me if I'm wrong, but you already said that they are appropriate for green integration already technically. So those kind of comments and questions have been answered.
Maybe I can add one other thing. So one thing that we are also discussing with the members on this is the communication protocols. So now the European Commission is working on this code of conduct for heat pumps and other appliances to communicate with the same language. But still, this is voluntary and it's not yet finalized. And at the moment, different systems have different communicate. I'm not the technical expert on this, but they all have different ways to communicate. So that's a very important thing, that it should be one common digital.
That's perfect, because actually I was going also to there. There was a question because they were comparing also with problems that we have in the electromobility and the EVs with regard to different communication protocols, interoperability, and so on. And if you face the same challenges, so practically now you come forward that this is a next step of focus as well. I guess when it comes to heat pumps. Maybe then I can just switch to a question with regard to capabilities, or how, for instance, technical skills are available when it comes to installing or managing heat pumps. I think that has to do also with the fact of facilitating the whole rollout of heat pumps, especially at the residential sector and so on. Do you see any barriers at that front?
Yeah, so the skills issue, it's really one of the main barriers. We had this week several meetings with our members, a strategy meeting, also an advocacy meeting, and it was repeated again and again that this is really, everyone agrees that this is a major barrier at the moment, that there are not enough skills, not enough, it's not only about installers, but also master degrees to really design the systems to work in the factories and so on. So it's really on all levels that there's a lack of skills, but both at the manufacturers are improving, or how do you say, are giving trainings and trying to attract new people and to retrain existing, for example, fossil fuel boiler installers to become heat pump installers. But yeah, it's a challenge. And also in the heat pump action plan, they're looking at to introduce a heat pump skills partnership. To see, for example, what could be a common denominator on like basic requirements for a heat pump installation skills. Another thing that we are looking into is, for example, as a heat pump installer, you need to know both a plumber, the skills of a plumber and of an electrician, and you also need to be able to design the system. So that's a lot of skills and requirements for one person. So one solution could also be to split it a bit more up and to have, like, for example, heat pump designer, heat pump fitter, so you can attract different types of profiles, and it's less demands on one person. So that's also one way to look into it. But indeed, the skills issue it's a big issue.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What I would suggest maybe now is continuing the discussion through the panel discussion that we have also organized for this workshop. But before that, I will still give the floor to Antonio for introducing this panel discussion, and then I can invite all the experts to turn on the cameras, and we can have a discussion with some remaining questions as well that we have to address. Antonio?
Yes, sorry, except me with the camera. But yes, just a couple of slides to introduce the panel issues. Nothing new, actually, a bit of a summary of what we heard. Very interesting, by the way. I compliment to all the previous speakers. Can you show, Ioannis, the next slide? Yes. So one thing we mentioned, almost all of us, is that we need to have a system view, because we are really linking two sectors which until now have been quite separated in terms of energy uses, but also in terms of actors, regulation, legislation, whatever. Even in the final consumption in the house, for example, you have electricity and gas, so you have different bills, different systems, different interfaces. So we have to consider that we will have the customer who have to be always in the center for having a positive business case and incentive to optimize their energy system, and oriented to the surface and comfort. The level of comfort has to be there, otherwise you cannot gain efficiency decreasing the level of comfort. We have markets. The markets have to develop to make it possible to exchange heat. For example, there is no market for heat, mainly because there is no large transport of heat. It's mainly a local business. But still, we have seen that, for example, with district heating, but also with conversion of energy and thermal storage, we do need market mechanism to link the two, even to give a value to flexibility flexibility from thermal, this will have to compete with other forms of flexibility. And the grid operators, of course, will have to keep neutrality in choosing the best combination of different flexibility means, also considering time correlation, something which if it is very cheap now, but I can need it in the next hours, on the next days, I have to optimize on a certain time horizon. And this helped by market mechanisms and modeling. We have to look at technology and innovation, of course, because these are some of the most important drivers. And in particular, in ENTSO-E, we are representing here the innovation committee. So European project demos and the TSOs should also, transmission system operators should also participate in some European funded projects in the field as for example, final user of flexibility, and at large society and politics, because these are all driven by high-level political targets. Something already said, but just to start the panel, there is a big elephant who is not here today. Is the gas infrastructure representative. Some countries, like my country, Italy, are heavily depending on this, and we cannot just switch millions of gas uses to electricity. For example, in a house, if you have you switch to electric heating, but then you still keep gas for cooking, or then it's no sense to keep a whole structure for gas supply if it is only for a small use like cooking. So this has to be faced at a wider level and also centralized level, because in the end it's an energy policy. And so coordination for investment, either in the devices, but also in the grids, and this has to be in parallel with the renewable electricity increase, because otherwise we risk to have, for example, if we have all electric vehicles tomorrow in Europe, we cannot say that we have decarbonized the vehicle system, because there is not enough green electricity to go for them. And maybe also this looking at non-energy sectors like buildings, manufacturers, the supply chain, skills and training. These all points have been touched upon, and they have to be considered all together. It's not easy. The complexity of the system is increasing, but this is, I think, the highest challenge to the complexity, which doesn't give easy solutions. And maybe there is another slide which can be inspiring. Yes, just the previous one. What is the difference between electrification of transport, which is already, let's say, mainstream? Maybe it's slower in some places, but it's clear that it will be mainstream, and the heating. Well, for the electric vehicles, there is maturity in the engines, in the batteries, in the battery management system, and maybe the missing point, the missing part of the chain is the charging infrastructure, but technology for charging is there. Instead, in the heat sector, for example, for thermal storage, there is still not full maturity, and we need to make a lot of innovation there. Another point is the decision to go for electric vehicle is upon the owner of the car, which in most cases, except from fleet manager, is the individual, the citizen. Instead, for heating, you can decide sometimes for your building or your own factory, but some points like waste to heat, district heating, or even combining the power depend sometimes from the availability of the surrounding environment for heating. For example, district heating cannot be there together with individual heating, would be not efficient. So it's a decision by somebody else, the territorial authorities. And another thing we can say, in the transport sector, we have a unique interface between electricity and transport, which is physically the charging point, which has already good degree, not total worldwide, but a good degree of standardization, and some smart by design features and devices. For example, smart charging, vehicle to grid, also tarification system, price, not only tarification, pricing system. Instead, typically the heat sector doesn't have standard interface, and the regulatory framework where it documented, and maybe there is not even a path, a regulatory legislative path to this harmonization. So all in all, we have a slower electrification phase. Maybe these are some concepts on which we can have the panelists contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much for introducing the panel discussion, wrapping up at the same time some key points. I would like to invite all the experts to turn on their cameras for addressing maybe a last set of questions, and also saying to all the attendees, this is the last call for sharing your questions to address them live. Of course, if we have any outstanding items that we didn't touch upon during these 2 hours, we will come back to you. So feel free, of course, to come back to us and or to any of the experts involved to this workshop with any follow-up questions. So trying to see a little bit also in terms of priority, the questions that we have received. Maybe I will start with Pauline. A question says that you didn't consider biogas as an alternative for future heating while using existing natural gas infrastructure. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, there is. Well, I think what we need to consider is that I presented some of the mainstream solution to decarbonize district heating and cooling, but obviously I think the main point is to use what's available locally, and we know that already in some countries they are betting on biogas. But I think in the district heating mix, this is still quite a narrow share, and in terms of expected growth, this will indeed further grow, but this will not take like a large share. So maybe it was more of an omission than completely ruling it out. I think in some countries also biogas is considered to still be fed in residential heating via the natural gas infrastructure. So I think it's a matter of how you envisage the transition as a country. We have example in the Netherlands where I think they will eventually phase out the natural gas grid. And then their tactic there is to leave large leeway to municipalities. I think, as Antonio was mentioning in the previous slide, to decide, well, to assess the feasibility and what kind of solution is best in which area, and then go for either heat pumps if there is no individual heat pumps if there is not density, or district heating. And then they are envisaging to completely phase out the residential gas grid. So if there is any biogas used, that will be in the district heating. So some countries, to make it short, some countries have the plan to use it in district heating, but this is rather more scarce compared to other resources, renewable resources.
Thank you, Pauline. And just to clarify also, maybe I direct the questions to specific experts, but of course feel free to jump in if you have any complementary points. So let's keep it flexible and loose in terms of discussion. Maybe I will then go ahead with another, let's say, shortcoming, if I may call it like that, at least in today's presentation. To Antonio, in the study, geothermal is not mentioned in the analysis that was done. It has the least impact on grids and provides storage and flexibility as well as baseload electricity. Is there any reason that has been excluded from the assessment?
No, indeed, it's not been excluded. Geothermal for production of electricity is there. It's already very mature, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of deployment. Wherever there was potential, more or less, it's been done. at least for feeding a classic thermodynamic electricity production cycle. What is geothermal interesting for is to use it as a thermal source for again heat pumps, or any case using the heat exchange or heat source, both negative or positive depending on which season you are. And in this sense, it is in the position paper. Of course, in few slides we didn't put everything, but okay, in order not to give this impression, we will add it also to the presentation, maybe before before sending it away.
Sure. Thank you, Antonio.
Just to complement that, for thermal storage, especially the geothermal is very promising because it is widespread everywhere. So geothermal for electricity is only where you have a good potential. So when you have relatively high temperature, or even already the vapor, the hot water inside the below the ground, but geothermal in low enthalpy you can use almost everywhere, and this is one of the big advantages that it is spread in all the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. The next one maybe can be for you and Rafael. You can maybe have both of you the floor. I think you made a comment actually relevant to it, Antonio, with regard that you quoted Italy, but in general, countries that are very dependent on natural gas. So how much electrification actually are we expecting, and also how much electrification challenges are we expecting? And what are also the routes to cope with such kind of challenges, especially when it comes in congested grids?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and yeah, it made me think as well, because I mean, first, one thing that I think in the IEA, but it should be in any analysis, be a bit technology agnostic, so consider all technologies. And I think that's something that we in our analysis, of course, heat pumps shouldn't be the solution everywhere, or district heat everywhere. I mean, we have a basket of solutions in our scenarios. I think it's, at least in the decarbonized ones, quite balanced between heat pumps, district heat, biomass, solar thermal. So there's no one solution that it's best everywhere. But when Antonio said that, which is very true, it came to mind. I think it was, I don't know if this year or last year, that in Switzerland in winter tour, they had a very nice policy plan in that sense, that they announced that the gas grid would be decommissioned in mid-2030s. So they give a good lead time to say, okay, after beyond 2035, I think it was 80% of the grid, the gas grid would be decarbonized. So giving enough time, for planning what would be beyond that. I mean, I understand decarbonizing or phasing out gas is not something that will happen in 2 years or in 3 years' time, especially in areas with a huge gas dependency. But that's why I think integrated long-term planning is very necessary, to put all the stakeholders, let's say, in the same direction, and to send the correct market signs. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult to have a, let's say, European or global assessment, because every country or even every city is a different world. So it's, yeah, that's why we need integrated planning to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rafael.
Very much agree on that.
Thank you, Antonio. Then another, maybe that comes also from your presentation, Antonio. So it is clear that smart, ready, and high efficiency devices only should be the ones that should be incentivized. But will it be any protocol to be compliant with to produce smart, ready equipment? And will it be European? In fact, that's a question probably that other experts can jump into it. But it was initially addressed to Antonio, and that's why I put it Antonio first.
But,
yeah.
Thank you. Good to have also some
go ahead.
round table on this, just to mention. Yes, and then to be honest, if we have a round table on this, it's not only the device which has to be ready to dialogue with the system. It's a full digitalization. It's a world which has inside a lot of things. It's a system. It's platform, it's a mindset, is a huge system because we are talking about millions. So there is also a big data thing, and so the full digitalization is still missing. And of course, this has to be done with some standard protocols, which I think are not there. Not only are not there, but maybe they are lagging behind. If we look at digitalization on of other aspects, like for example, the more demand response, more in general, there are a lot of pilot projects already well working, which but which are not so much extended to the heat sector. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add, I agree. It's indeed, it's not only the device, and there it's not a big issue because devices are smart grid ready, but it's indeed the mindset, platforms you need, the aggregators and so on. Also installers, they need to be aware about this and need to be, yeah, able to switch this on and explain this also to the consumers. But indeed, for us, we really see that the main barrier is indeed this reward for this flexibility. Once you have it, you will have business models making use of this. You will have consumers asking for this because you can, yeah, you can get a financial reward for it. So it's really, that is the lacking trigger we see to really unlock this whole potential and make it yeah, rolled out on a large scale. Yeah, specifically in certain countries. Of course, for example, in the UK and in France, it's already more available, but yeah, in other countries, not at all. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Josephine. The next one comes more with relation to coordination. So it's pointed out that most of the decisions are taken on decentralized levels, for example, households, while actually those decisions have implications on central infrastructures, for example, electricity or hydrogen grids and so on. How we can best ensure an efficient coordination on both levels? Your opinion, and I think everyone can chip in probably to such kind of questions.
If I may start, sorry,
Go ahead.
Cannot see you. I cannot be seen, but also I do not see you because I am on the mobile phone. I think this is a very key point, not only for heat sector. Decentralized investments and decision for also small investments, but also for all generation plants in electricity. No, they are all. Then I'm talking in the European environment. Outside Europe, there are still some monopolies or the integrated utilities, not unbundled. But centralized management for electricity, especially also for gas. But what has to be centralized dispatching, not managing. Actually, we only have the burden to keep the lights on with security, stability, and quality of service. But the main point is that what is centralized, what has to remain or to go back to be centralized, is the policy decision. So, for example, until 10 years ago, which generation plants, the electric generation plants, were to be built, it was totally a free choice, and there was just a request of authorization, then request of connection, etc. But with the renewables, it's already not like that. There is a plan that we need this much renewable with this path, on the time horizon, and then you can stimulate with auctions, for example, or with contract like PPAs, because there is the problem of high intensity of capex with zero opex for this kind of plant. So this is an example where centralized policies and balanced incentive can then trigger private and diffuse and decentralized investment decision. And maybe this is applicable also to the heat sector, but I would say also to many other energy sectors. But more and more, it is important that there will be somebody, which is not mandated until now anywhere, to look at the whole energy system, because otherwise everybody has a responsibility and mandate on only one part of the system. And we are trying to make to maybe in the electric system, which is in the backbone, maybe in the sector coupling, almost all the sector couplers go pass through the electric sector. So we are trying to address the interfaces, but we cannot still address the whole system. And somebody, maybe not only political, has to be also technical, should go for it. Not with the final decision, but for the trends and the instruments for trigger it from financial and other kind of incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Anyone
also,
else? Yes, sure.
Yeah. Yes, from my side, I think indeed one of the key aspects is what Rafael had also mentioned, is to have this policy clarity. We have clear targets. This is where we go. These are the measures on how to establish it. It's clearly tracked and followed up, and also at national levels. So that also makes it easier for example, ENTSO-E to and TSOs and DSOs to really take this into account in their grid planning if there's very clear targets and measures to implement this. Also, currently the Commission is working on an evaluation, or there's a consultant doing this for the Commission on an evaluation of the energy system integration strategy. So they are looking at how far did we come since 2020. What should still be done, where are the gaps? So I think this central person or institution to look at this and to follow this up could be a key outcome of this system integration strategy, or could be a key next step. So I think that's a very good proposal. And then also in the heat pump action plan, one of the pillars is also that they will establish a data and monitoring platform, because currently heat pumps, both residential and industrial, our data are actually the most used, and also by the Commission. They base themselves a lot on our data, but to have this even more precise and to really also keep track on what is happening at national level and so on. But that's, again, that's not the whole system. That's the heat pump part of the system, but it can add to overall.
Thank you, Josephine. Maybe if yes, Rafael, please.
If I can say something super quick, I fully agree with what Josephine and Antonio said before, but just came to mind something linked to also what Pauline said before on energy models, and I think this can be also a part of the story. Not only primes methods, but many models were developed, let's say, to tackle other types of energy systems, and now we have systems that are very different, decentralized on the supply and demand side, with many different sectors and sector integration in general. So I think models should also evolve to try to capture this and help decision makers and policies to be better informed. Let's say, just this quick comment.
Yeah, thank you actually for that, because we can. I would follow up then on that, maybe to Pauline. So, what specific improvements actually we could see as necessary to to improve those existing tools with the current inadequacies that they have?
Thanks, Yanis. I'm not a modeling expert, small disclaimer, so I won't be really able to go into the technical details, but this is a point that we raised actually when we answered the Commission consultation on 2040 targets. So basically, these models were based to really assess the energy system, but it's based a lot on the power sector, and I think they don't reflect the other source flexibility. So, for instance, the thermal storage aspect is not really reflected there, and also the local potential sources that can be valorized in district heating. So waste heat, namely, that's still difficult to be there. What I know from the primes and what we included in our points in this consultation is that it's an annual energy balance tool. So it forecasts the development of the EU energy system over a 5-year period. So we would need maybe things that are a bit more on the short terms. And I think what we also ask is to include the data generated from several EU projects. So, for instance, the spin-off of the Heat Roadmap Europe, so the Synergy project. It's Synergy with a double E, as in energy efficiency. So we would see a little bit more data from this project included. But as I said in my presentation, we have seen that there is currently a tender from the European Commission on update of the MATIS model. To actually assess, adapt the model and include also demand, all the demand sectors. So I think, this is probably a positive point, and this will help because we know the role of the models for the policy making.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you very much. Looking also a little bit at the time, we are approaching more or less to our wrap up. I think we covered all questions actually we received, either through your slides or now through your points. Maybe a last one that just came, so I triggered one last question probably here. The future role of CHP providing residual electric load and then buffering heat into storage is not addressed. Is there a reason to exclude this?
I'll take this one, I guess.
Yes.
I added it into the toolbox, so it is definitely there. I said that, and I think the others definitely picked up on this. The role of CHP will change from baseload to more backup and flexibility capacity. So no, this is definitely taken into consideration, at least from the heat perspective, because we rely a lot on CHP. So this is definitely part of our future perspective, but this will change. But I don't know, maybe Antonio can address or someone else the electricity perspective on CHP.
Just one flash comment. Until now, CHP, well, it was both in our ENTSO-E presentation and in your toolbox, which I like very much, that slide, the compliment. CHP until now was an efficiency measure, but the production of heat and electricity are not flexible between them. So typically electricity follows it, or sometimes it follows electricity. Instead, if we include the thermal storage and other kind of flexibilities in the system, if we manage to decouple, not maybe totally, but up to a certain extent, the heat and electricity production, there is a lot more space for CHP, for a more modern and more system integrated CHP, I think.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Pauline, for covering this last question. And with that, we can move to the last part, leaving the last challenging part of the conversation today to Norella Constantinescu, Head of Innovation Section at ENTSO-E, to wrap up today's discussion. Norella, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ioannis. I hope that you see me. I don't think you, no, you hear me, but you don't see me probably. This is the challenge when you just try to close without trying the camera first. So what I would like to say, first of all, thank you very much to the speakers, to the audience for the questions you raised. Thank you very much as well to the team of ENTSO-E, which put together this workshop, Ioannis, Sidash. Thank you to Pauline, to Josephine, to Rafael, to Antonio, and to Marco for the presentations and for answers you provided. And it is now my challenge to conclude in 2 minutes. So we have heard actually today about the power and heat sector integration. Of course, this is passing through electrification, and heating and cooling sector are the sectors which are going to drive the electrification in the next 10 years, sometimes rather abruptly, as I think Josephine and also Rafael was showing. We will have actually the electrification in the residential sector, but also in the industrial sector. Of course, there are differences there. For the industrial sector, it's not straightforward, depends on the temperatures and depends on the processes. We have also listened to actually alternative, not to bet everything on the electricity as energy carrier, and Pauline was bringing this idea. We have also heard about deployment figures, which I will not mention now. Indeed, it will be quite steep and strong, and this will cause peak powers and will also actually require the reinforcement and the extension of the electricity grids. But also, as we have heard, the optimization through the other grids like district heating. We also look into business models, and this involves from the consumer side actually the value stacking related to flexibility from the electricity sector, which we represent as ENTSO-E. Of course, this will be a service we look both in short duration type of flexibility, but also long duration, which was mentioned through thermal storage. And I think with that, I would once again thank you all for staying with us for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I will stop here and have a nice afternoon.
And thank you to Ioannis for keeping the time perfectly and being an optimum moderator.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks all speakers. Thank you very much, Norella, for wrapping up. And as said at the beginning, we will share the recording and the slides also at the ENTSO-E website. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.